So I think we are all set up on Facebook. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Riverwood Conservancy's webinar, My Serendipitous Journey from There to Here, Evolution of a Wildlife Photographer with Gary Hall. My name is Stephanie. I'm the Community Program Coordinator at the Riverwood Conservancy. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe. I want to say a special thanks to Credit Valley Conservation for supporting all of the work that we do. Before we get started, I just want to mention that all of our June programs are now on our website, so please register for as many free programs as you would like. On your screen now, you should see an entire calendar of virtual events. We have a lot of interesting guest speakers in June, so please check them out. Anything highlighted in yellow are programs that are coming up and are open to watch. And we're also easing our way back into in-person events that adhere to public health guidelines, of course. And we'll be offering outdoor yoga and outdoor meditation events every week through July and August. Spaces are limited and you can register for their sessions at theriverwoodconservancy.org/events. And if you would like to support our virtual programs and hopefully more soon in-person programs and conservation of Riverwood's habitat and wildlife, please consider donating on our website. Before we get to our wonderful speaker today, the Riverwood Conservancy would like to acknowledge that the land on which we operate is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee nations. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this place is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. And this evening, we have Gary Hall, who is a retired teacher, having taught for 45 years with the Peel District School Board. He has been an avid photographer for more than 50 years. Gary started to specialize in wildlife photography just over 20 years ago. He has also been a volunteer with Caledon Meals on Wheels and the Bruce Trail Conservancy, where he is currently the Land Steward Director with the Caledon Hills Bruce Trail Club. So welcome, Gary. And we also have one of our wonderful volunteers this evening, Thomas, who is helping me ensure the webinar runs smoothly. If you have any questions during the presentation for Gary, please type them in the chat, Q&A, or comment section, and we will address them at the very end of his presentation. So Gary, I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Okay, thank you. I'll just try to get the screen share going here, and we'll get started. And here we go. I hope everybody can see that.
Yep, we can see it.
Just going to say a few words about this silly title that I have here. This comes from my days when I was teaching and going on school on trips with kids, on field trips with kids. And usually as the kids would get on the bus, they'd be really, really excited about going on a trip and getting away from school. And this would continue for maybe half an hour to 45 minutes. Then finally, the inevitable question would come up, are we there yet? And I would usually say, no, we're not there. And a couple of minutes later, another question, are we there yet? And I would say, no, actually, we can never get there because when you think you're there, you're here. And of course, they wouldn't get that. And after a while, they get frustrated and then stop asking the question. So when I started doing these presentations, you know, I was talking about my journey from here to there, but taking my own advice, I'm not there, I'm here. So what I'm going to do tonight is talk a little bit about where I was in photography maybe 20 years ago and how I got to the place where I am right now. Back in the early 70s, when I first got into photography, I took several courses through Sheridan College and Humber College. And it was more on the technical aspect of photography and darkroom work. And I really, really loved that part of it. But eventually, as I started traveling, you know, I did in fact, different aspects of photography, including a little bit of portrait photography. I was freelancing for a while with a local newspaper, and also travel photography whenever I had a chance to travel. So just before I really got into wildlife photography in a big way, I took a few courses at Humber College on portrait photography, and I really, I really have an appreciation for good portrait photography. Not that that's a great picture, but it was nice working with models in the studio, and working with different types of lighting techniques. And I think it was a good experience for what was to come in in all kinds of photography. I also got into a little bit of wedding photography, but I found wedding photography very, very stressful. This particular picture I took back in the days of film. And when you shot a wedding and you had to wait for a week to get all of your prints back, it was extremely stressful. And I always said later that I enjoyed wildlife photography much more than wedding photography, because the moose doesn't care if the picture turns out, but you don't want to tick off the bride. I also like candid shots. This is a picture that I took of my granddaughter when she was about 3 years old. She's now almost 13, so this was about 10 years ago. And I was babysitting for the afternoon. It was in the fall, and I had to rake leaves. So I really anticipated that I might be able to get some decent pictures of her playing in the leaves. So I took my camera outside and I set it on a planter, and I just raked leaves, and she watched and she played. And then finally, after I had a big pile, I just left it there and watched to see what she could do. And of course, as an active 3-year-old, she got in there and she was really, really clowning it up, waving all over the place. And I was taking pictures. And then finally, I just said her name, Frances, and she looked up like this, and I snapped this picture. And this is my favorite picture of her. Then, of course, I decided to turn it into a black and white picture and do a little bit of get a bit creative and do the selective color on it. But on the color photograph, the boot is actually red. And it turned out nice. And by luck, I happened to get that catch light in her eyes. I didn't use a flash. In fact, I like to take photography as much as I possible without using flash and just using the natural light. And I took this picture of this fellow. This was in Yellowstone National Park. It was a photographer out there doing what photographers do. I don't think he realized I was taking the picture. You may recognize this guy as Dave Taylor, your own Dave Taylor of the Riverwood Conservancy. And this is where I'll just begin my story, a little bit of a story about my serendipitous journey. Now, I'm not going to get into that too much, but the journey into wildlife photography actually started about 10 or 11 years before I actually got into it. Back in 1990-91, I was a consultant, a guidance consultant at the Peel Board of Education. And it was a 3-year posting. And at the end of the first year, the board cut the program. So I lost my job and I had to go out and look for another job. And I ended up getting a job at Hazel McCallion Senior Public School. John Stone was the principal. So we're keeping this in the Riverwood family. I was fortunate then to get a position there as a guidance counselor. And about 3 or 4 years later, the same thing happened to Dave Taylor. He was an outdoor teacher at the Britannia farm, and the board cut his program too. So Dave ended up at Hazel McCallion School. And I keep thinking back that had neither of those two events happened, I probably wouldn't have got into wildlife photography and got into a type of photography that I'm really passionate about. I probably wouldn't have done that without those two random events happening. When I do talk about photography and what you can do to improve your photography, I often say that if you can find another person who is an avid photographer who is completely different from you, that's what you should do, because that's when you're going to learn things. And I learned from working with Dave at Hazel McCallion and going on many trips with him. He had a real knack for anticipating and reading the behavior of animals. And after, I guess it was probably in the early 2000s when we started going on a few trips together. And I learned a great deal from Dave, and I wouldn't really be at the position where I'm today without his expertise. And I'll be telling a few stories about that a little bit later on. So another thing, I guess, which was fairly random, after I retired in 2000, I thought I would do a little bit of supply teaching, but my idea was to do a day here and there. But I happened to get called back a few times for doing long-term assignments. And I found that I was finally in a position where I could actually afford some of the expensive lenses to be able to get into wildlife photography, something that I always wanted to do. I dreamed about it. I always said that I was a wannabe National Geographic photographer. Never thought it would actually happen. But with those, the extra money that I got from doing those long-term assignments, not only could I afford the equipment to get into wildlife photography, but I could afford to go on some trips. And as it turned out, I was doing a long-term assignment at Hazel McCallion, and I found that Dave was about ready to retire, and he was going to be leading a trip to Africa. So I checked with my wife to see if she would mind if I left her for a couple of weeks. She was still working part-time. She probably wanted to get rid of me and get me out of the house, but she said, fine, you know, she encouraged me to go, and I'm really, really thankful. This is one of the few pictures of this leopard in the southern part of the Serengeti. It's one of the few pictures that I actually use flash on. I don't like using flash. I like to use natural light as much as possible. But when you have a leopard in your site like this, you do what you have to do. And the lighting here was very contrasting. It was coming from the back. There were a lot of shadows. So I happened to set the camera so it would pick up the ambient light and set the flash on, and it got that little bit of it lightened up the shadows. In fact, I took them out completely, and I got that nice catch light in the leopard's eye. And this is my favorite picture of a leopard. So over the years, actually, I went to Africa twice with Dave. This was a really exciting shoot in the southern part of the Serengeti, an area called Ndutu of 3 cheetahs. This is kind of a mating ritual. It's very, very rough play, and these 2 male cheetahs are checking to see if the female is ready to breed. This went on for about, I would say, 10 or 15 minutes. It was really, really rough. And then finally, the 2 males marched off in one direction and the female went in another direction. I really fell in love with elephants when I went to Africa, right from the very beginning. Seeing elephants in a zoo and seeing elephants in the wild is something just completely different. I would say that of the African animals, elephants are by far my favorite. They really display their emotions, and they caress each other, and they have human-like qualities, or maybe I should say that humans have elephant-like qualities. Seeing the actual herds of antelope, you have to be there. It's not like watching this on the Nature Channel or watching a David Attenborough documentary. Being there is just totally different. This is, of course, a herd of impala, and there you see the male or the buck on the left, and his harem, and some of the young ones on the right. Africa is just an amazing. It's my favorite place to go. These were taken in East Africa. I did several trips, I guess 4 trips altogether with Dave to Yellowstone, and this is probably my favorite wolf picture. Not very many people get to see wolves in the wild. There are wolves up in Algonquin Park. I've never seen one in Algonquin Park, and I've been there several times. You're very, very lucky if you see a wolf in Algonquin. Several wolves in the northern part of Ontario. Of course, around here we have coyotes and what they call coy wolves, but they're not the same as wolves. These, again, I guess they're my favorite North American animal, because like elephants, they're very social. They have their family networks, and they're just wonderful animals. Had a chance again to go to Galapagos. Now, I really didn't have any desire to go to the Galapagos. Dave wanted to go, and I don't think his wife wanted to go or was anxious to go with them. So he talked me into going to Galapagos. And I was actually on the plane. We were landing on North Seymour Island, and I was still thinking, well, do I really want to be here? I was only there on the first little tour of North Seymour for about 5 minutes before I really fell in love with the Galapagos. It's a special place. And if anybody ever has a chance to go there, you should just jump at the opportunity. These are frigate birds, and you can see the male there with his pouch all puffed up. You know, that's what they are like in the breeding season. And of course, the blue-footed boobies are really amazing when you see them. This is a picture that I took. This was at Sam Smith Park of a now I'm having a little bit of a brain freeze here. This is the well, I'll come to it in a minute anyway. It's the least bittern. That's what I'm trying to find. The least bittern, an endangered species. They're very, very difficult to photograph because usually as soon as they land, they're there for about 2 seconds and they take off. This particular bird was very, very accommodating and also entertaining. And this is one thing, again, that I learned with going on photography trips with Dave is you don't always follow the crowd. The crowd was on the other side of the pond from where I was, and I was able to get beautiful, beautiful pictures of this least bittern. A little bit later, though, when I came back a little bit later on the scene, everything had changed so that the least bittern was with the crowd, and I was left on the other side of the pond. But I'll show you a few pictures from that in a little while. Now, again, one of my tips in photography is learning how to see. And I stole this title from a book that Freeman Patterson wrote back in the 70s called Photography and the Art of Seeing. I've been an avid hiker and hiked with Bruce Trail for many, many years. And I used to spend a lot of time tailing at the end of the hike with my camera, seeing what there was to see and seeing if there was a picture that I could really tell a little bit of a story. So here we have the group on a group hike, a Tuesday hike, coming to the end of one end of the Caledon Trailway, mile 0. So this is on the very western extreme. And we're actually heading into Terracotta Provincial Park, Terracotta Conservation Area. But what caught my eye on this, because I always watch for different compositions and different pictures I can take. There's a story to tell here. And that, of course, is the Caledon Trailway, mile 0. And it was also the colors. The gentleman in the immediately in the front of the picture there, wearing his the orange jacket with the blue backpack really stood out, and the fog in the background, the lighting really appealed to me when I took this picture. So I'm not just into wildlife photography. I like to do as many candid shots as I can. This was a picture of a little blue heron that I took in Costa Rica. So when I first saw the little blue heron, it was in the shadow. You can see that there's only a little part of this this branch that is in the light. So when you see a bird or an animal you want, you always take an establishing shot just to make sure you get a shot of the bird, but then you wait to see what's going to happen. And I waited to see the bird actually walk into this little patch of sunlight, and then I snapped the picture. Now, of course, when you take a picture and you snap the shutter, you're only part way there, especially if you're taking your pictures in the RAW format, because RAW is meant to be edited. So I did some editing on this, not much. There were some lighter patches, you know, and what you see in the black part of the photo. So I just got rid of those. I thought it would look a little bit nicer without them. And I like to saturate my colors, because when I was shooting slide films, I usually used Fuji Velvia, which saturated the colors. But it did saturate the landscapes. It was really not very good in wildlife photography, because it was only a 50 ISO film and you needed an awful lot of light. The first time I went to Africa, it was great because you always had lots of light there. But walking through a forest looking for owls, which I did, you know, was a really, really frustrating experience because you really couldn't get a decent picture of it. I wanted to show you this picture of an Indigo Bunting. Some of my earlier trips to Point Pelee, I get really, really excited when I would see an Indigo Bunting. And when I show friends pictures of Indigo Buntings, they often say, "Wow, where did you see that?" Well, I've learned that all I have to do is take a 10-minute walk down the Caledon Trailway, or if I go on a hike for an hour, I'll see several of these birds. And they often just look like a blackbird on the top of a tree, because the lighting can make all of the difference. So this is an indigo bunting in the light. This is an indigo bunting where the sun isn't really shining on it. You can see the amazing difference in color. What I learned to do, because you see this little bird at the top of a tree and you look up into the light and you just think it's a blackbird. But if you learn a few bird songs, it'll help you realize when you're coming across an indigo bunting. Now, I would say in the last 2 weeks, I've probably seen a dozen different indigo buntings, not very far from home. I'm just going to play you the sound of the indigo bunting and just listen to it. It kind of has different pairs of notes. This is how you can always recognize when you're coming across an indigo bunting. Then you can look for it and then hopefully see it through your binoculars or take a picture of it. Notice how it has those different pairs of notes, and at the end of it, it has a little bit of a chatter that you didn't hear on this one. I'll often take, I have my iPhone with me, and I have the Merlin app on it. And if there's a bird that if I think that maybe it's a certain bird, I'll just play it on the Merlin app to confirm whether it is that particular bird. Lighting again. This is a picture that I took in Kruger National Park in South Africa 3 years ago. And Kruger is very, very different from the Serengeti from East Africa, South Africa and East Africa. This was taken in July, which was winter in South Africa. And the lighting there was phenomenal. Now, it was frustrating in a way because you can see all of the bushes here, kind of a wooded savanna. And it can be frustrating trying to get a clear picture of an animal, but boy, when you do, this is probably my favorite picture from the whole trip, mainly because of the lighting. It reminds me of kind of a children's picture book fairy tale of this giraffe. And the lighting, this was taken, probably was one of the first pictures that I took as we entered Kruger. It was very, very early in the morning, but that lighting, that phenomenal lighting lasts all morning, in fact, almost all day, because the sun is low in the sky. This is a greater kudu, a younger greater kudu that was taken in Kruger, but you can see, again, the beautiful colors that you get with the lighting. This, of course, is a cheetah, different type of lighting. It's backlit, so you see the rim lighting on it. This is a case where, and I didn't really have time on this one. I don't even think I had my flash on the camera, but you could improve that picture a wee bit by putting a little bit of catch light, flash catch light in the eyes. But as I said earlier, I tend not to use flash on animals. In fact, I don't even take my flash with me most of the time that I'm doing wildlife photography. Some photographers use something called a beamer, and they know how to use it, and they get great pictures with the flash. But again, it tends not to be my style. Inclement weather. Again, this is a Yellowstone picture, and there are so many bison in Yellowstone Park. After a while, I don't really pay too much attention to them. But again, I was with Dave on this particular shoot. In fact, all of my Yellowstone trips were with Dave, and as we were watching these the bison, all of a sudden this snow squall came in, just out of the blue. And this little calf, it was kind of windy, and I guess the calf was cold. It came up and snuggled against its mother, and then I was very pleased with this picture with the mother kind of being a protector of the calf, and the calf being comforted by the mother. Another Yellowstone shot. With wildlife photography, it's a combination of knowing your camera and knowing the settings, of being very, very patient, and also just blind luck. Threes work out very well in photography, any type of photography. So how often do you get three bighorn sheep all lined up, looking in the same direction with a little bit of snow in the background? Again, the combination of the three came out in this particular photograph. With wildlife photography, you have to work very fast because your composition can disappear on you in seconds. It only takes one of these these bighorn sheep to turn its head to kind of ruin that particular composition. That's one thing I love about wildlife photography, is it's changing all the time. It's really, really challenging. Very different from, it's a different discipline from landscape photography or portrait photography, because you have animals and birds and mammals that are in constant motion, and you have to be on your toes 100% of the time to get the image that you really want to have. Another Yellowstone shot, these pronghorn, something had spooked them, and pronghorns are the fastest land animal in North America. And it had been raining, it was wet, and something spooked this group. They were running across the valley and through a stream, so they got wet, crossed the road, and then came up. And again, this is where luck really comes into it. They had been running at full speed, and then halfway up this hill, they stopped, all in a line. And then you see that little wisp of fog in the background. You know, it's the lighting here again, I think, that makes this particular picture. Also the composition, because, you know, in a way, you couldn't set it up any better to have, you know, how many pronghorn are there? About 8 or 9 altogether, kind of facing in the same direction, and actually stopped. They stopped there for maybe 30 or 40 seconds before they moved on. Observation. Observation and anticipation kind of go close together. And of course, you recognize this as a young belted kingfisher. And I'd been waiting on this. I was trying to get a picture of it flying, and it tilted forward, and I kind of anticipated, okay, it's going to fly. But of course, it didn't fly. At least it didn't. It had a poop, and I was so fascinated with the fact that, oh, well, maybe I got this picture, you know, having a little bit of a poop. And as I was checking my family, of course, it flew away, and I missed the shot. But this is another thing to recognize in wildlife photography, especially with birds. They can be sitting there for a long time, and very often before they're going to take off, they have a poop like this, and then of course they take off. And of course, I missed that particular shot, but I got this one. This was taken at the LaSalle Park in Burlington, and this almost adult bald eagle had been feeding on a duck. I kind of have 2 names for this shot. I call it fleeing the crime of the scene for one, or the demise of Donald Duck. But to the right of that picture, if it were in there, you'd see a big pile of poop. And there were some other photographers, about 3 or 4 other people there waiting on this eagle, and we had been watching it for 10 or 15 minutes. And I learned to, again, through tips from Dave, to keep your eye on the prize. You know, don't take your eye off that prize. Get your focus all set up and ready to go. And when that bird's going to fly, hit the shutter and, you know, take a burst of photographs. And, you know, when the poop happened and the bird got a little bit restless, I was all ready, and I was able to get a series of shots of the bird in flight just taking off. I would have liked it to be more of a you know, full adult bald eagle, but I had to, I'll settle for this particular shot. This is one that didn't work out too well for me. Again, with Dave, we were at Tommy Thompson Park on the Leslie Street Spit, late in the afternoon, beautiful, beautiful lighting on the ice, and I was kind of in la-la land, not paying too much attention when Dave said, get ready, take the shot. And of course, I didn't get ready, and by the time I took the shot, I kind of like the shot anyway, but it's not tack focused the way I would like it to be. And I often wondered at the time, you know, how did he know these birds were going to take off? Well, of course, after a while, you kind of learn that, you know, through their movements and through their actions and through the sounds, if they're going to take off. This is a shot that I took this spring of a couple of trumpeter swans, and they had actually, they're a mating pair. That's the cob in the foreground and the pen in the background. And they had been at the far end of the pond to the right. And they were doing mating displays. And then casually, they swam down to the other end of the pond. Well, I've learned that they do that for a reason. And they got a little bit restless, and then they started to honk. And through the fact that they swam down to the other end of the pond, they got restless and they started to honk. You know that they're going to take off. And the reason that they went down to the other end of the pond is big birds have to take off into the wind, or they usually take off into the wind. And of course, once they displayed those behaviors, I was all ready for it, and I got some shots of them. And with trumpeter swans, they need a long runway, and I got several shots of these swans taking off. This is a picture of a snowy owl. You recognize a snowy owl, taken about 5 weeks, I guess, before we got shut down for the pandemic. Dave and I were in Amherst Island, and this is a combination of getting your settings right on the camera, of knowing certain signs, and just being ready, and of course blind luck. As it happened, we were literally surrounded by snowy owls. I've never seen anything like it in my life before. We had a good dozen, if not 14 owls. You could just turn 360 degrees, and wherever you looked, there were snowy owls. But why this particular one? Well, it was an extremely cold day. It was about 16 below zero, with a wind chill of about 25. And we stood there for a long time. Every once in a while, we'd go into the car and get warm. We'd come back and set up. And as luck would happen, finally the owls, there were about 2 or 3 of them that took off, not directly toward us. It's very difficult to get a picture of an owl. Big birds don't, by nature, they don't fly directly toward you. You're lucky, over a few years if you get a few shots of them flying towards you. I always get suspicious if I see somebody showing a shot after shot after shot of owls and big birds flying toward them, that there's a good chance that the birds are being baited. But this is probably one of my best shots of a snowy owl, and earned that one because it was extremely cold, and most of the time standing there, hands in mitts for a while, and then taking the mitts off because I really can't. I don't have any luck of taking pictures with gloves on. This is Algonquin Park again with Dave. One of our favorite trails to hike when we're in Algonquin Park is the Missy Lake Trail. It's at the north end of the Arrowhawn Road. And whenever we're in Algonquin Park, we hike this part of this trail about twice a day. And from the parking lot to get to this spot, it's about a 20 to 25 minute hike. We were going down in the morning, and the light wasn't nearly as nice as this. And we met some people coming back saying, "Oh, there's a moose down at the at the pond." Of course, then we rushed down to see if we could find the moose. When we got there, the moose was actually lying down with its back toward us. And after about 5 minutes, it got off and sauntered into the woods. But then this is where the anticipation comes into it. We thought, wow, the lighting will be much better if we come back in late afternoon. And there has to be a reason for a bull moose during the rutting season to be hanging around this area. There's probably a female around somewhere. So later on in the afternoon, we trekked back to this pond. I think it's West Rose Pond or something like that. And I've been by this dozens of times before, thinking, boy, this would be a nice place to find a moose. Well, of course, we found it that day. When we arrived at the location in the afternoon, when we first got there, no moose, but about 5 minutes later, it sauntered out, and it spent quite a time there. We actually walked away from it after a while, but we wouldn't have got that shot unless we understood the behavior of moose and understood that the lighting that we wanted would be later on in the afternoon. And this turns out to be one of my favorite moose shots. There are different ways of taking pictures of animals. One of them is the portrait, which is probably my least favorite, but this is how you start off, at least how I started off in wildlife photography. I wanted to get that moose in the whole picture and nothing else. You learn after a while that that's not probably the best way to take a picture of the moose. So a better picture is putting the moose in the environment, or getting a kind of behavior out of the animal, which is another kind of a good editorial shot. And I have several of those pictures. I'm not including any in this particular presentation. This is taken from the Galapagos. This is a sea lion and pup. And when you're in the Galapagos, you have to be with a guide. You can't just wander around on your own, and you always have to stay on the path. So I was with the guide. There were about a dozen of us in the group all together, listening to the guide, but at the same time watching, being observant to find out, where were the photographic opportunities. And when I first saw this pup, it was actually in the water, and I saw it come out of the water and then crawl its way toward its mother, and it finally snuggled up against his mother. And then I got this shot of the mother. It's a very in a very loving pose, and you can just see how this little pup is just enjoying the snuggle that it's getting from its mother. Again, one of my favorite Galapagos shots. This is a sign you have to watch out for. This was taken in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. And reading the signs, you don't want to mess with this guy because he's really, really angry. Not angry at me, as it turned out. There was another male bugling in the background, and they were kind of sparring via sound. And but when you see something like this, sometimes big animals, a bison, and so on, can just be seem like big docile animals, but you have to be really, really careful, because I was standing right beside the car when I took this picture. It can be very, very dangerous when it's around animals like this. Getting back to my least bittern. Remember last picture you saw, I was on the other side of the pond. And after a while, I found out that everything had changed. The odds had really, really changed. I was on the wrong side of the pond. The crowd was on the proper side of the pond. And sometimes if you want to get the picture, you have to do some things that you normally wouldn't feel that comfortable with. When I came around to this side, the crowd was about 2 bodies deep, shoulder to shoulder. And I really couldn't even see this guy. So I ended up almost on my hands and knees, crawling through the layers of people, and then trying to find an opening in the bushes to get a clear picture of this. And I finally did it. I was in a very uncomfortable position. I wasn't blocking anybody's view because I was really, really low, but there was an advantage to being low because I'm at the same level of the least bittern. And I'm only about 10 to 15 feet away. This picture isn't cropped at all. And in fact, the real least bittern isn't any larger than what you see here on the screen. It's only about 10 or 12 inches altogether. It's a very tiny bird, but very, very pretty birds. And you're lucky to get one that is patient enough to let you take a picture of it and get this close. And I was able to set up, get my focus set, and then keep my eye on the prize. You can't afford to even blink almost. You have to watch very, very carefully to see what that bird is going to do. So I waited until I saw it tip forward a wee bit. It did a few times. Every time it tipped forward a bit, I would take a burst of photos. But finally, you get something like this, okay? You get it coming in, catching the fish, and then back up again with the fish in its mouth. And I have a whole series of pictures of doing it that way. I don't know whether I'll ever get this close to a least bittern again in my whole life, but I'm very, very happy with this particular picture. Photography and the art of hearing. This is a Dave Taylor story. We were in Yellowstone National Park, and we had heard that this beautiful female mother grizzly bear had been in an area called the Dunraven Pass. And every time we would go through the pass, it was part of our route between the Hayden Valley and the Lamar Valley. We would look, and no luck, we wouldn't see it. But one time we were going through, and we saw a bear, all kinds of cars parked, and a crowd of people all lined up along this curve on the highway. So of course we stopped, parked the car, and joined the crowd, and was there for a few minutes. I look around and try to find out where Dave is, and Dave's nowhere to be seen. And I go, where did he go now? He had a habit of doing that. And after a while, I keep looking down to see if he's around somewhere, and finally I catch his eye, or he caught my eye. He was about 100 or 200 meters down the highway totally away from the crowd, and he's waving me down. And I thought, oh my goodness, what does he want now? So I finally sauntered down to join him, and he said, the bear is going to come out here. I said, what? You know, all of the experts and the big photographers with those long lenses are way up on the curve. What makes you think that the bear is going to come out in this location? He said, listen, listen. And when you did listen, you could actually hear the cubs bawling. And he said, they're hungry. They want to be fed. They're having temper tantrums, and it's moving this way, and they're going to come here. And sure enough, that's what happened. They came right out where Dave said it was going to happen. And I was able to, this is one of the cubs of the year. She had 2 with her that particular day. Actually, she had been seen with as many as 4 because she had adopted a couple of cubs from a sister bear that had been injured in a car accident, not killed. But this particular time, she only had 2 with her. But you see the beautiful colors. The lighting is very nice, showing the beautiful colors, at least on these particular shots. As the lighting changes, the bear looks totally different. So this is the same bear. You see the lighting is different on it, but the bear coming out basically where Dave said it would come. But this time the crowd has arrived because they saw us down there waiting, and a few other people joined us. Next thing you know, the crowd has arrived, and the bear is coming through. And what you tend to do, no ranger was here at this particular time. Usually the rangers clear you back so that the bear has a chance to cross the highway. And of course, the people there knew enough to do that. We had some people on one side of the road and some on the other. And here we are. I'm on one side where the bear is crossing. That's me in the white pants with my little zoom lens. Dave was on the other side. Dave took this picture. You notice the people with the great big lenses aren't even looking through their cameras. So I learned 2 or 3 things from this particular shoot. First of all, don't follow the crowd. You know, think for yourself. Secondly, learn how to listen. And thirdly, sometimes it's best not to have that big 600mm lens, because if the bear is too close, you're not really going to get a decent shot of it. So I happen to have the 100 to 400 zoom on. You can see from this picture, it's not even at the full zoom for me to get this particular picture of the mother bear and the cub coming up on the other side. The only problem with this is it doesn't have that nice lighting that I got of the bear. It doesn't show that nice grizzled look the way in fact, it looks like a totally different bear here. This picture of this mourning warbler was taken in Polygrade Forest. Last year, I had set up a little challenge for myself because I couldn't go anywhere because of COVID. I guess this is another, serendipitous moment. Who knows that everything was going to get shut down by COVID. And I learned of all of the wonderful photographic opportunities I could get just by walking from home. And I was walking through Polygrade Forest, and I've learned through doing photography not only to watch for the light and to observe and anticipate, but also to listen. And I never take for granted when I hear any rustling in the leaves. I don't take for granted that it's a squirrel or a chipmunk. In this case, it was this bird, and I'd only photographed a mourning warbler once, and that was at Point Pelee, and it wasn't a great shot. And the bird was hopping around these tangles, and with warblers, especially this type of warbler, you're lucky if you get them to sit still for 2 seconds to get a shot. And it finally came up into the opening in this nice little area and a clear area where it wasn't blocked by branches, and I was able to get the shot, mainly because I was patient. It took me a little while. I had to I had to not assume that I wasn't going to be able to get a picture because it was down in this clutter of branches, and to be patient and wait for it to come out in the open, where this is where luck comes into it. And the lighting was just right to get the little catch light in the eye, and I was able to get my best picture so far of a mourning warbler. You recognize this as a robin. I took this a couple of weeks ago, I guess, on the Bruce Trail. I love getting pictures of birds on Bruce Trail blaze posts. And this is another, I just wanted to illustrate the listening bit of it. So this is a robin, and we're all familiar with what robins sound like. I'm going to play the sound now. Listen carefully to the sound of the robin. Okay. Now, this you'll recognize as a rose-breasted grosbeak. And when I first was aware of the bird being in the area, I heard it. I didn't see it. I heard it and watched for it. And it was not in clear view when I first heard it, but eventually it posed for me. And this is again where luck comes into it. You have it posing, you get the little catch light in the eye. But listen to this. Sounds much like the robin. And you know, it's often, the rose-breasted grosbeak is often described, the song is often described as a robin that's taken opera lessons. So if there's something that sounds like a robin, I don't necessarily assume it's a robin anymore. I'll wait around, take a look to see if it could be something else. And in this case, I got, well, I guess my best picture of a rose-breasted grosbeak. This was taken last summer up on the Bruce Trail, one of the properties on the Bruce Trail. And this you will recognize as the scarlet tanager, or I like to call them the the black-winged redbird. But listen to the song. Again, sounds much like the robin. In fact, when I came across this, I heard it first of all and thought, sounds like a robin, but no, there's something a little bit off about that. And of course, it happened to be the scarlet tanager, described as the sound of a robin with a sore throat. So that just shows that sounds can often get you the picture that you want, or a desirable picture. This isn't my best picture of a white-tailed deer, but I'm a land steward for a property in the Hockley Valley called Hemlock Ridges. And I was walking along the trail, and of course I usually have my camera with me because I like recording the flora and fauna of the property. This is important when you're a land steward. You're really encouraged to record as much flora and fauna as you can, make a record of it. And in this case, you know, I take the pictures and I put them on Google Drive in a folder, a Bruce Trail folder. And I actually heard this white-tailed deer before I saw it. I heard the snort and I recognized it as a white-tailed deer, but I couldn't see it. So I moved very slowly because it was just around a bend in the trail. And of course, I got to the bend and there it was. And it really seemed to be very mesmerized by me for some reason. It stayed there, I would say, for about 30 or 40 seconds. And I was able to move back and forth. You know, it's not unclear, there are branches in the way, but I always like to, if I can, get the eyes in the picture. And I was able to manipulate myself to a place where I was able to pretty well get its eyes in the picture. And it was a really wonderful few moments because it was very quiet. I was all by my own. I was enjoying the sight of this beautiful animal. And it seemed to be mesmerized by me as well, looked at me, and then finally up went the tail and off it bounded into the forest. And this is my only picture so far of a white-tailed deer in Hemlock Ridges. I'm sure I'll come across a better one at some point, but this is, in wildlife photography, you take the picture, you get the best one you can, and hope that sometime in the future, you can maybe get a better one. This was taken on one of my walks from home last year of a red fox kit. And I was at the Palgrave Pond. There was a nice lookout overlooking the Palgrave Pond, and it's a good place to take bird photography, especially early in the morning. And I was actually looking in the pond. My back was to where this little fox came out of the trail. How did I know it was there? Because some squirrels set up one heck of a fuss. And when you hear animals like that, you know, if you hear squirrels start to really chatter and get excited, they might be just playing with each other, but they might be setting up a bit of an alarm. So you listen for that kind of thing. So if you hear crows kicking up a fuss, you always pay attention to it because they may be swarming an owl. Or if you're walking through the woods and you hear the chickadees and small birds kicking up a fuss and flying around a little bit of a bush, it might be a saw-whet owl. So hearing is very important. When I first took a picture of this fox kit, when it came out on the trail, it was right in the sun, and there were terrible pictures. But finally it crossed the trail. Then it was in the shadows, but eventually it came into the sunlight, stopped for about 30 seconds or so, and just and stared. And I was lucky enough to get it in the sunlight with the catch light in the eye. And sometimes with a bird, especially if it's going to stay for a little while, you know, again, you take a picture of it when you first see it, but then you watch. All it has to do is just turn its head a wee bit, get the catch light in the eye, and that makes all of the difference. It makes the picture come alive for you. More than just a pretty picture. So as I moved into, this is getting into more the here now of wildlife photography. Eventually, first of all, when I first got into it, it was taking the trophy shot. Wanted to get that trophy shot. I wanted to get the portrait. I wanted to get the pretty picture. But now it's much more than that. Now I want to tell a story. And I want to tell a story of the plight of the monarch butterfly and the symbiotic relationship between the monarch butterfly and the milkweed plant, and how monarchs rely totally on the milkweed plant, because the female lays its egg only, well, it will lay its eggs on different plants, but they will only mature if they're on milkweed plants. We don't have to worry about this one laying any eggs because it's the male monarch, and you can tell that if you're not familiar with it by this little black dot. There's on each side, there's a little black dot on the wing, and the veins on the wings are a little bit thicker than the female. But you know, this again shows the monarch on the milkweed plant, and there's a story there. There's a story here too of animals, my very favorite African animal, and it just shows how sensuous these animals are and how loving they are and how they caress each other. You know, you really learn to, you know, your heart really aches when you hear the stories of the poaching that goes on, and the ivory trade, and how these animals are being slaughtered just for their ivory. So again, I have become much more of an environmentalist. I guess I always was. I was always wired in that particular direction, but much more so now than I was when I first started the wildlife photography. This is a Galapagos shot. This is the famous Lonesome George. Now, Lonesome George was probably the most famous tortoise in the whole world, not because he was the largest. He's well over, you know, over 100 pounds here, I guess. Not because he was the oldest. He's over 100 years old, but because of the time that this picture was taken, he was the only one of his species. All the rest of the species had been totally wiped out. And in the Galapagos, it's a wonderful place to visit, because each island is unique. You have endemic species that are just endemic to any particular island, and the tortoises are the same. I think there once were about 14 different species of tortoises. Some of them have this round shell like this. Some are more of a saddleback. They're all different shapes. All of them really huge and beautiful animals in their own way. But poor George, exactly 8 months after I took this picture back in 2011, George died, and he was the last one of his particular species. Now, does that mean that he was really the last one? I came across an article about 3-4 weeks ago of a tortoise from the Galapagos, from one of the islands, that was thought to be extinct for about 100 years, but they found another one. And there's always been a search going on from George's Island to see if they could find another tortoise. But you learn when you visit there, you know, how these tortoises got in the situation where they are, mainly by being taken off by sailors, you know, for food, but also by the sailors introducing goats to the island, so that when the sailors would come back to a particular island, they would always have food, because the goats would multiply, and the sailors could come and shoot a few goats, and they would have food as they would move on. But what these goats did was they totally stripped the islands of their vegetation and destroyed the habitat of the tortoises. And in the Galapagos, they're making a real concerted effort now to bring the tortoise population back, and hopefully at some point George's species will come back as well. The plight of the rhino in Africa. This is a white rhino. There are white rhinos and black rhinos, and for those of you who are not familiar with the white rhino and black rhino, they're both about this color. White comes from an Afrikaans word meaning wide. The white rhinos have a wide mouth because, like this one, it's grazing. It's grazing on the short grass. The black rhinos are browsers. They will browse the leaves on little bushes. In Kruger National Park, when I was there 3 years ago, we were told that there were over 10,000 white rhinos in Kruger. Now that sounds awfully impressive. 10,000, what could possibly go wrong? We also learned that the poachers take an average of 3 white rhinos a day. And they predict that at this rate, within another 10 to 15 years, you will be lucky to see a white rhino in the wild, or any rhino in the wild in Africa, unless something is done. In fact, the day that I was there and going through, or one of the days I was there going through the park, there was a helicopter way off in the distance, and you knew that something was happening. And really what happened was the rangers were catching up to some of the poachers, and one of the rangers was actually shot and killed. The other thing that the poachers do is they shoot the vultures, because the vultures will give them away. The vultures will come in if there's a dead animal, and the poachers don't want the vultures to give their location away to the authorities. So they will shoot the vultures, which creates another environmental disaster, because it's the vultures that clean up the environment, and we need the vultures. So this is a real problem in Africa, and I certainly hope that they are working on it. I certainly hope that something can be done to stop this. And the plight of the cheetah in Africa. Cheetahs are in danger, but in Namibia, they have a really effective conservation program going on. There are more cheetahs in Namibia than any other country in Africa. And many of the cheetahs are killed by farmers, because the farmers believe that cheetahs are responsible for killing their livestock, where in fact it's not necessarily, it's usually other animals other than cheetahs. But they've been doing an education program with farmers. They've also introduced a type of dog that can protect the herds and warn if there are any predators around. And it's been a very successful program. So through this conservation program in Namibia, the cheetahs hopefully will be able to survive okay. And of course, there's the Yellowstone wolf. What you have here in the foreground is a wolf. The animal in the background is a coyote. You can tell the difference. You can see the different shape of the head, and the tail of the coyote is a little bit fluffier than the one of the wolf. But by visiting Yellowstone, as I said, it's you're almost guaranteed. In fact, this one trip in Yellowstone, we saw wolves every day and got them really close enough like this to photograph. Usually wolves and coyotes are enemies. Wolves will usually kill a coyote. This particular one, though, has a full stomach, because it was part of the famous Druid Peak pack from Yellowstone that had just cleaned out a coyote den. And so this one has a full stomach, and she's not paying any attention at all to the coyote. The coyote knows there's no danger there either. But in visiting Yellowstone and reading about it, you learn how the wolves that were cleared out of Yellowstone back in the 1920s are not introduced again until 1995 from Canada, how they have saved the ecosystem of Yellowstone. I'm not going to get into the story, but it is a fascinating story. And it's brought the ecosystem back into balance, which had been lacking for many years in the park. It's a really great story. There are many books about the wolves in Yellowstone, and I would really recommend that you read some of them, because these wolves are just studied inside out, and you learn all of the habits of the wolves and the different social structure that they have. Again, my favorite North American animal would be the wolf. Home at last. This again brings us back to the pandemic, that I found that everything being shut down, couldn't go to Point Pelee, had a trip planned with Dave to go to Norway to photograph polar bears and Arctic birds and animals. You know, really couldn't go anywhere. I was like everybody else. You know, I had to stay at home or close to home. So right away, because I'm a hiker, you know, I started hiking around Palgrave and came up with this little challenge to see how many different species I could photograph by walking from home. This is about 5 kilometers from home, which was about 5.5 kilometers there and back. It would make, you know, about 10 to 11 kilometers altogether. That would be my route. And there's a pond near Gore Road, and I'd been by it many times before because I'd hike by it all the time. Never realized the variety of birds and animals that you can see just in this one spot. Never realized that if you got there early in the morning, the phenomenal lighting that you could get. Just look at this picture. Get there early in the morning, the water is calm, you get the beautiful reflections from the vegetation in the background and a couple of swans like this. So this picture and the next couple of ones are taken at that same pond. The Caspian tern, one end of the pond, the birds that catch fish love to come down, catch a fish. And so it's a great area to get flight shots. You know, I didn't have to go down to Lake Ontario or anywhere else to get flight shots. I could get all of the ones that I really wanted and more just from this one little area. And even mammals. As I was watching the Caspian terns, I looked up and here this family of deer, the doe and the 2 fawns are taking a drink at the end of the pond. And didn't seem to be too concerned with me. You know, you can see that the doe is being cautious, looking at me, and I was on the other side of the pond. This is taken with a telephoto lens, so I'm a good 100 meters away. But they were like that until all of a sudden the Caspian terns noticed them and took exception to them being in their pond. So of course they harassed the deer and the deer took off. Okay, I'm going to finish in just a couple of minutes, but this one, I want to tell the rest of the story. Now, for those of you who know Dave Taylor, and I guess most of you who are familiar with Riverwood would know Dave, you realize that he just published a book called Natural History of Black Bears. And he gave me a copy, an autographed copy, and I was very thankful for that. Because it's a great book and I have read it from cover to cover. But I was sitting in the rec room reading it, and all of a sudden I just broke out laughing, tears in my eyes when I came to this part. He says, "I joke when hiking in bear country, I like to have a companion I can outrun." Guess who his companion was? Once I was with another photographer working a large male grizzly that we had spotted a good distance away. We hiked a good 300 meters or 330 yards from the car when my friend saw a better location from which to photograph, so he left without telling me. He also took the car. Now, this would have been fine with me, except the bear had by then closed the distance between us. Suddenly alone, I had only one option. I stood very still and watched as the big bear walked slowly by me some 50 meters away. Listen to this sentence. Then I slowly sought out my friend. Now I have to tell you the true story. That's not really what exactly happened, but we had been observing wolves, and you can see the wolf watchers on this hillside overlooking Slough Creek. And it was an area, you know, they could look through their spotting scopes and they could see a wolf den way across the valley, and you'd need a spotting scope to see it. Even to see the wolves, you know, you could see the wolves, but it was very difficult getting a good picture, even with the big telephoto lenses, but we tried. As we were with this group watching the wolves, Dave spotted a grizzly bear way off in the distance and realized it was heading for the highway and was going to cross the highway. Now, when we were on these trips, we always take turns driving. We split the day into 2-hour segments, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. And it was my 2-hour section where I had to drive. And of course, Dave saw the bear, and we nothing would do, but we had to go and see if we could get a closer picture of that bear. So when we arrived at the highway, the bear had crossed the highway and was just headed over this hill and into the valley below. And here's where observation and anticipation come into it. We thought, okay, if we drive down the highway a couple of 100 meters and we come up to the top of this hill, we may be able to get pictures of the bear walking across the valley. So that's what we did. When we parked the car, and again, I was driving, I parked the car, and we're heading up this hill, and I have this spot in my mind that I'm headed for. And when I get maybe 50 or 60 meters from it, I see the set of ears heading toward me, the very spot that I'm headed to. And I thought, oh my God, you know, that's the grizzly bear. So I backtracked. The bear couldn't see me, but I was very, very cautious. I had the car keys with me, and I knew that I figured that if there was any danger, I could always hit the panic button. But I backtracked to the car. Dave was off to my left, and at that point, it was kind of Dave who, you know, I'd forgotten all about poor Dave. And I drove the car a couple hundred meters down the highway, but all I was doing was following the tips that Dave pointed out to me through the many years that we had photographed together. You observe and you anticipate. So I did that. I observed and I anticipated that if I went a couple of 100 meters down the road, there was a parking area, I could park safely, that there was a good chance the bear would come out and I would be able to get a good picture of it. And here it is. I'm in my parking spot, standing beside the car, actually right at the driver's. I have the door open and the camera is leaning up against the car. And here comes the grizzly bear. And you can see it's a big male bear. It's one of the biggest grizzlies I've ever seen. And, you know, take a look at this. Take a look at the claws on that. Now, when Dave said at the end of it that then I slowly sought out my friend, that's not really what happened. Dave came storming down the highway, hopping mad. You might say as mad as a bear with a sore you know what. And at that very moment, I was not his friend. We laugh about it now, but it was kind of alarming when it really happened, especially for poor Dave. And this ends my presentation. I got many pictures like this of animals heading away from me. Okay, I'll stop the screen share. And if we have any questions.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Gary. Those were wonderful stories. And there's lots of people in the chat saying thank you for all of your great stories. We do have a couple questions to get to. To start, I believe someone asked, sorry, I'm just going back. One of the first photos that you showed was of a leopard, and Jamie has asked, were you ever scared of the leopards? And I guess any other nature that you came across?
Well, that particular bear kind of scared me, especially when I found myself. That's probably the most scared I've ever been, because I was headed for this exact spot where this bear was. He was headed in the same direction, and in opposite directions, and we would have been a disaster. I wouldn't be here, I don't think, if I had reached the crest of that hill at the same time as the bear. With leopards and in Africa, no, I've never really felt afraid there, because in Africa, you're always with the driver, with a professional driver, with somebody who really, really knows the animals. And the drivers there never really back themselves into a corner. I've been in a situation where an elephant has really charged us, but of course the driver is always ready, again, not to be backed into a corner and to hit the gas and get out of there really fast. That animal was just sleeping up in the tree, and you know, really, they tend to be used to animals there because there are so many tourists. Or the animals are used to people because there's so many tourists around. So it's a very safe place to go. I wouldn't hesitate in the moment.
That's wonderful. And I don't know if you see the chat, there's just so many comments coming in from the participants, happy with all of your stories. They were wonderful. There's another question that came in from Lynn, who said, amazing pictures and stories. Where do you want to travel next, Gary?
Well, I want to get this pandemic over just so I can go down to Lake Ontario. I noticed a little Facebook post that Dave had been to the Caledon Albar, and we usually go together. And of course, I didn't get there this year. There's so many places. So to start off with, I just want to get back to some of those locations just around here. But I'm looking forward to trips to Algonquin Park, hopefully this fall with Dave. Just day trips out again. Now we have done one or two during the pandemic. I'm looking forward to going to Point Pelee again next May. And of course, Dave and I had a trip planned to Svalbard, an archipelago off the coast of Norway. We had it planned for last July. I had to cancel it because of the pandemic, but we planned again, hopefully to go next July. It is booked for July of 2022. So I really want to go there. At some point, I'd like to go to the Antarctic, and I'd like to get back to Africa at least one more time. Probably, if I could, I'd like to go to Botswana. East Africa is just a wonderful place to go. So, of course, I'm running out of racetrack. I'm not getting any younger, but I plan to go as long as I can.
You have some big plans. That's awesome. Earl's asked, do you always shoot manual mode or sometimes aperture control? I'm not sure what that means, but okay. I'm sure you do.
There are different ways of shooting, and there's no right way. Okay, I have shot aperture control. Right now, because I'm taking a lot of pictures of birds around here, I'm shooting shutter priority, which is the shutter speed. So I tend to keep it on a really, really fast shutter speed. I keep the ISO on automatic, so the camera will set the ISO. Usually that's what I do. Cameras are very good now at, you don't get as much noise with higher ISO, so I go with that. I'm not as particular anymore of getting the perfect picture. And I do because I do most of my photographs now when I'm hiking, it's not very practical for somebody my age, especially, to be hiking around with a heavy lens and a heavy tripod. So I tend to handhold now because I'm more into the enjoyment now, the sheer enjoyment of the wildlife photography, rather than getting the perfect picture. So I'm traveling light, handheld, shutter priority, but I try different things. Shooting manual is a great thing to do. I haven't done a lot of it, but I think I'll probably experiment more with it. Because if you have the luxury of getting the proper exposure of a bird, especially birds, and you do spot meter it and meter the bird and get that exposure properly, then if the bird flies and then you keep shooting, you will always have the bird properly exposed. So if it goes from a dark area into the sky, for example, the bird will always be properly exposed. So if you're skillful enough, and I can't say that I am at this point, if you're skillful enough, that's probably the best way to go. But if you choose shutter priority, whatever works for you, do it, enjoy it. Don't really worry about what other people do. Do what you feel comfortable with, but don't be afraid to try new things.
That's great. Those are some great tips, Gary. And as an amateur photographer myself, I think the biggest tip I took away from this evening was that birds poop before they fly off. So now I'll always be looking for a bird to poop.
It doesn't always happen, but often it does.
Often it does. Okay. That's a great tip. So thank you so much again, Gary. Everybody's saying thanks in the chat and thanks on Facebook as well, and saying your photography is beautiful and so are your stories. So I just want to thank you for coming out this evening and chatting with us. And I believe you'll be back on July 21st with another webinar with us. So if you want to sign up for that one as well, it's a free talk and Gary will be joining us again. And thank you, Thomas, our volunteer as well, for being here this evening and helping in the chat bar. And I think that is all from us this evening. So thank you so much once again.
I'll just say one more thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of my tips in photography, to really, really feel relaxed with photography, it's what I call photography with a purpose. So now my photography, rather than getting the trophy and the perfect pictures, I have a purpose to it. And because I volunteer with the Bruce Trail Conservancy, that's much of my purpose now. So the presentation in July is going to be about stewardship stewardship on the Bruce Trail. And again, it'll feature a lot of my wildlife photography. So I welcome anybody to take part in that.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Gary. We are looking forward to that presentation as well. And everyone have a great evening. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.